You're listening to Monday Matters, a Principal Matters podcast production.
Hi, Principal Matters friends. This is Will Parker, along with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke, back for another Monday Matters. Jen, this is a recording that's going to come out August 18th, and schools, lots of schools that I'm working with are back in session, or are going to be back in session, or are gearing up to be back in session.
Right.
So how you doing?
How's the
world feeling in Ohio?
We're doing great in Ohio. Most districts are either started by now or they're going to in the next couple of weeks. So the energy's high, and everywhere I go, I get to visit a lot of schools this time of year, and everybody says, "Oh, summer just went so fast," and it's so true. Summer's like a blink.
Well, at the time of this recording, I'm just returning from a couple of different schools that I got to work with. Since the last time we talked, I've been in Columbus. I've been at a small school here district in Oklahoma, Holdenville Public Schools. I've been back to Cleveland to work with a college prep school there. And I'll just be honest, Jen, my brain is like so scrambled from airports and travel, but the learning has been fun. And talking about learning, I wanted to take the chance and Monday Matters, we know, are kind of abbreviated episodes compared to our Wednesday flagship shows, but this is just a chance for us to stay current with our listeners. And I want people to know more about your new book. So we've done a couple of episodes already about earlier chapters, so go back, listeners, if you haven't heard those. But Jen, you have a chapter called Trust Pillars and Trust Killers. And so let's unpack that for a few minutes. Why is it important for you to think about those concepts when it comes to building trust?
Right. Well, I began this whole journey writing this book with a sketch, as I often do. Mm-hmm. And I was sketching, I was working with a group of principals, and one of them said, it just doesn't seem fair. It seems like we as administrators have to be trustworthy all the time, get to be trustworthy all the time, but yet it doesn't always feel reciprocated. It doesn't feel like other people necessarily are as trustworthy as they expect us to be. And I thought that was a really interesting question. Mm-hmm. And so I was doodling, and I started to sketch something that remotely looked like pillars. And I thought about how something needs to hold the weight, so to speak, of all the human and emotional needs of people involved in a school. Mm-hmm. And then I started to sketch things that kind of kill trust that people do. And I don't think anybody ever wakes up in the morning and says, I want to be untrustworthy today. I really don't. But I do know that there are things that we do sometimes and unintentionally that can break trust. So the pillars hold the trust up, and then the killers are the things that we do that tear those pillars down.
Okay, so let's sit there, because all of us are, when we're doing the work, sometimes it's important to take a step back from it and just examine our own practices and ask ourselves, are my practices building the pillars for trust here, or are my practices killing the trust here? And maybe I don't even know it. So, Jen, what are some of those pillars and killers?
That's what I want to get into. And before we do, well, I want to tell you a full disclosure here. I love thinking about school culture. I love to talk to principals and work with principals about what feels good in their buildings. So when I started to write this book, that's what I was doing. And my editor reached out and she said, "Hey, how can you tie this to instruction?" And I thought, well, I can. I'm talking about how it feels to be in a school. And she said, we need to know how trust a principal's relationship with teachers, how they feel about that, if it, that teamwork, that efficacy, how it actually affects students. So I thought, oh man, well, okay. So I started to do a little research, and I found that in fact, there is a direct correlation between trust that teachers have with their principal and multiple measures of student achievement. It really does matter. There was a study done by Bozeman in 2011, and it's a meta-analysis, and it points out that teachers' trust in the principal and the principal's trust in teachers improves student graduation rate, ACT results, scores in English, reading, and mathematics assessments. So
Mm.
principals really do need to think about trust, not just because it feels better to work in an environment of trust, but it directly affects student achievement. So
That's so profound. And I'm so
yeah,
glad you said that because in you and I are both in some ways former practitioners, but also currently supporting practitioners. And um, and it's so nice to see when the research supports what we're
right.
seeing,
That's
but
right.
be able to say, man, that direct correlation between the trust of a teacher and a principal and the
Right.
reciprocal trust
Right.
between them creates the kinds of cultures that produce higher graduation
Better
rates,
results. Mhm.
higher ACT scores, and
Right.
higher performance among
That's right.
students. So what I hear you saying is um, that it is not it's crucial, it's essential, and it is foundational if we're going to see successful schools.
That's
But
right.
I guess my question for you, Jen, is how do principals cultivate those pillars? How do they, what are those things, what are some behaviors that they may need to keep in mind or some practices they may keep in mind to build those kinds of foundational pieces of trust?
That's right. So this the pillars of trust that I outline in the book are, and I'll just go through them very quickly, and then we
Mhm.
can dive a little bit deeper into them. And this is what I call faces of trust. And so there are, one of them is the willingness to be vulnerable.
Mm,
Others are benevolence, reliability, competence, honesty, and openness.
mm,
And then the final one is professionalism.
mm,
So I want to give credit where it's due. Those faces of those faces of trust have been well researched. And I can send you to put in the show notes where people can dig in more into these. So the first phases of trust have all been researched, and then I added professionalism just from my experience. So
mm,
let's dive a little bit more into the first one, which is that willingness to be vulnerable. And I think that there are two qualities that um, principals sometimes grapple with. And one is toughness, and the other is vulnerability. And it often feels like those two can't live together. And I would argue they absolutely can. And so in the book and also in my own work, I try to integrate those two at the same time. This way, I try to admit uncertainty. When I'm not certain, I say that. So we've talked before on the podcast how wise and easy it is to say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that question right now, but I'm going to get back to you. That shows that you can be vulnerable, that you don't know something, but follow
mm,
through and get back to someone. Rely on a team. Creating a team of teacher leaders is so critical in carrying out and serving your staff with support when things get difficult. Refusing to run away. This is both that vulnerable piece and the toughness piece. When you run from a problem or when you deflect a problem, you create an imbalance of power within your own leadership structure. So you're usually giving somebody else power if you're not taking control of it. So you don't want to run away. And then the final one that I think is very important is pausing to recalibrate whenever you're kind of overcome with emotion. So if you're in that vulnerable place and the emotion is winning, you want to pause and recalibrate yourself. Tell yourself, I have a lot of feelings right now. I'm going to step away from them. And then what works for me is when I identify a task that I can tackle right now to distract
mm,
my mind.
mm. I love all those, and they're just so practical. And I'll just say this to listeners too, so that Jen doesn't have to do the work of putting all her research in the show notes. Buy this book because all of this content that Jen is discussing right now, and I've had the privilege of an advanced copy, Jen, and I love this book so much. Um, those are such practical ways to be building the foundations of trust with other people by practicing the kind of behaviors that you would want to be receiving from someone else. Um, I don't know, for some reason, Jen, when you just as you're saying all those things, it reminds me too of this. There is this, I think one of the challenges of leadership is remaining true to yourself while trying to learn the role of all these responsibilities that you're carrying. So you want to put on a brave face and you want to seem like you have the right answers and you want that equanimity. You've used that word
Hmm.
before too, that sense of calmness and presence. But with that too, you can't be fake. And people know when you are. And
Yes.
so this being able to admit uncertainty, rely on a team, refusing to run away, and then pausing to recalibrate are just a part of remaining human
Right.
in the role of being a leader.
Right. And the reason I tie vulnerability, by the way, with toughness is there was a principal who called me. She was working in Oregon actually at the time. And she said, I'm trying to embrace vulnerability, but I'm kind of in trouble with my superintendent because, I show myself, my true self with my staff. And a couple of times I've stood up in front of the staff and I've cried. And the principal or the superintendent really doesn't like that. And I said to her, I don't know that crying is a great idea. I just don't. I
Mhm.
feel like that's when you step back to recalibrate because emotion and vulnerability doesn't mean that you put everything out there and when things touch you deeply you cry in front of 80 people. That's not a good look, right? So
Mhm.
that's where the toughness comes in and that's where the self-discipline comes in. Vulnerability should not get in the way of the way people look at you in terms of strength to lead the building.
No, that's a great reminder. I don't know why, but it's reminding me. A friend of mine once said to me, when you're in a public setting, we were talking about music. He was like, I'm okay with people taking risks in their singing or their playing of instruments as long as it doesn't make the crowd feel so uncomfortable
Right.
that it's painful to
That's
experience.
right. That's
And
right.
it's the same thing with vulnerability. There's a way to be open and honest and true with people, but not cross that line of
Right.
suddenly making everyone feel like
Right.
that they're having to be your public
That's right.
counselor
That's right.
in those moments too. That's so
Right.
important, Jen.
Yep.
Let's switch the focus now to because I know that we're limited on our time for Monday Matters here, but what are some behaviors and we in some ways are already talking about this that can kill trust?
Right. Well, can I do one more trust
You sure
pillar?
can.
And it's because it's a word I love. The word benevolence. I love this word
Mm,
because this word means well-meaning and kind.
mm,
And so that's another trust pillar that I really think is important for principals to integrate. And to be well-meaning and kind means to ask questions, to not be dismissive, to work collaboratively, to walk into the building every day knowing that everyone's trying to do their best. And so that takeaway, to avoid the negative judgments, spite, frustration, to project your own stress onto the staff, that's not going to build trust. We want leaders who are kind, compassionate, and well intentioned. So
mm.
that's my favorite word of the day. So there's other trust pillars within this book and within this chapter. But
Well, and we'll come back to those because I know you're
okay,
going to build on that same concept when we
right,
talk about your next chapter too, and just
right,
kind of revisiting how these look for both teachers, parents, students. Um, so I don't want to rush through any of this, Jen. I want to make sure that folks get so much value from this conversation, but I do want to turn that coin over for just a moment
right,
because sometimes you see people who do things that maybe intentionally or unintentionally um, are killing trust. So
right.
let's just address a couple of those.
Right. So, yeah, let's think about those. A few things that I've seen that really fracture that trust with teachers is misaligned goals.
Mm,
So, if a principal has a certain goal for or a vision for how the schools should move forward, and then the assistant principal has a different one, and the counselor has a different one, and the freshman department team has a different one, you're going to notice that there's a lot of fractures in within the teams with workload, with deadlines, with stress, with assignments, with expectations. And so to have misaligned goals can really break down trust because people don't know what's going on. They don't
mm.
they walk in and they think, wait, what are we doing here? So we know that aligned goals, especially instructionally, that's where the strength of a trusting relationship between principals and teachers will have a positive effect on the instructional practices that are in the classroom.
I
So
love that.
so
Mhm.
that's one of them. Another one that I see all the time is too many new initiatives. And
Mm.
I talked with our mutual friend Danny Bauer about this not too long ago, about how, we always add to the plate and we don't take anything away from the plate. And so in that sense, the weight of all the initiatives is what kills the trust.
Mhm.
And we talked about, and Will, you and I have talked about this quite a bit too. It takes a lot of courage to actually take something away and
Mhm.
to resist the instinct to add. There's always somebody selling something or a new idea that will make everything better. It'll fix all the problems. But what it can do is just break that trust that principals may have built with their staff.
No, just two reflections, Jen. Those are so good. Sometimes those misaligned goals, um, and you touched on this, are the result of miscommunication. Because I'll just say it this way: the things that are really clear in your own head as a leader, that are goals and initiatives for you, you may have thought that you communicated those things clearly, but it's not. Don't assume that.
Right.
Because just because you understand that goal and just because you've set it as a priority, you've put it on your calendar, you would be so surprised how often people don't even know that that's
That's
something that,
that's
yep.
exactly right. And I'm glad you said that, because so many times I've heard principals say, we developed these goals with the leadership team. I made posters,
Mm-hmm.
I put it in an email, and now nobody even remembers it. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, what's that saying? You have to say things 3 times for them to stick. I think it's about 30 times actually,
Mm-hmm.
because people are busy, especially at the beginning of the year as they're setting up their classrooms and they're meeting their families and they're, getting ready for an onslaught of assignments, requirements, etc. They may not absorb your email. They may not look at the signs. And so it has to become embedded in the culture of the building, whatever those visions, those goals are.
Well, and the reason I'm smiling as we're talking too is I think about that plus what you said about too many initiatives. I just can't tell you the number of times I've sat with leaders, high achieving,
Hmm.
extraordinary people, some of the best in the business. And I'll ask them that strategic question, Jen. If you're getting ready to say yes to this, what are you going to say no to?
Right,
And 90% will say, I can't think of anything I can say no to.
right,
And then I'll think in my own head and we'll explore then what are you going to do with the burnout then?
right.
Because if there's nothing you can say no to by
That's right.
saying yes to there's always an exchange. And that exchange doesn't necessarily mean I just don't do the other things that are important. The
That's right.
exchange may be where we're prioritizing them, or who can I train and build a capacity to help me do this, or when can we postpone that till another time, or seriously, what can we stop doing
Right.
that we're doing that could be removed from our to-do list.
That's right. And I experienced this myself not too long ago in my own district, where we added another literacy assessment. It was much better than the one we currently had for all the reasons. We had done the research, we had focus groups, we had pilots and everything. Well, then there was still the previous assessment that was out there. And there were multiple teachers who were like, we can't let that go. And I tell this story because we assume sometimes that teachers will be like, oh, good, take something off their plate. But there's a little value in everything, right? And so
Mhm.
you can't just take an axe to a previous system and say, we're not doing that anymore. What we needed to do was sit down and say, okay, what do we lose with this prior assessment? Where can we gain that? Teachers, you are so good at your jobs. You're so professional. You know what you know. If we let this other assessment go, what would you gain and what would you lose? So that conversation had to happen. If principals had just stood up in front of their staff and said, we're adopting assessment number one and we're eliminating assessment number two, that would have been from the top leadership. It would have been, there wouldn't have been rationale to back it up. And so, that needed to be as much of a rich conversation as the decision to implement something new.
So good. Well, Jen, let me bring it full circle as we wrap up today's conversation. And Principal Matters listeners, I just want to encourage you to continue listening because in the weeks ahead, I'm going to just keep asking Jen to share more content from her new book with us. But Jen, for me, it always comes back to what are the attributes of a strong classroom where you see the best learning taking place. And everything you just described is what we dream about seeing teachers develop with their students: benevolence, vulnerability, honesty, openness, professionalism. So my question to leaders and to all of us is, how are we practicing the same attributes that we're asking our teachers to do with their students? Are we taking a step back from our communication, our initiatives, all those conversations, and pulling our people together, and having those hard but meaningful conversations so that we're building trust and not eroding it? So,
Right.
Jen, thank you so much for this new resource. And Principal Matters listeners, I know you can find all of Jen's resources at her website. Jen, what's your website called?
Yep. My website is jenschwanke.com. And a new feature on that website is a free download of a study guide for this book and actually all of my books. So you can go to my website and download those for free. And they'll give you a really good teaser of what's in all of these texts.
And you should sign up for Jen's newsletter, because that's going to be problems. What do you call it?
Principal problems. Principal problems.
Because Jen just gives you some Jen time that she's writing about regularly. And of course, I would love for you to be subscribed to our newsletter at williamdparker.com. So when these podcasts come out live, we can let you know about them and any other work that's happening. So you can check out our resources and books and podcast archives at williamdparker.com, or you can reach out to Jen or me by email at will@williamdparker.com. And Jen, what's your email address?
Jen@jenschwanke.com.
Well, until next time, Jen, thank you for doing what matters. And Principal Matters listeners, we hope you have a great week, and we hope you listen to Wednesday's show as well, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Monday Matters.